and your grout's gonna start to crack. And then your tesserae are gonna fall off. It's not a good look. But also, all of those things on the adhesive are going to cover up the adhesive. You're no longer going to have self-adhesive mesh, you're just gonna have mosaic mesh. One of the benefits of grouting your mosaic is that it keeps things in place, you know, kind of like Spanx in a way. For me personally, it's a firm no. But I'm gonna tell you why and how I got to that answer, and you can make the decision for yourself. And if this is an outdoor mosaic, you wanna make sure that you address that issue before you put that mosaic outside. Our last question in this section asks, can you use window screen as a substitute for mesh? Let's get to it. Welcome back. And if you're new here, my name is Julie. And on this channel, we talk about tips, tricks, tools, adhesives, materials, and specific mosaic projects, all to shorten your learning curve when it comes to creating mosaic art. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please consider subscribing. Lately, I've been receiving a number of questions in the comment sections of my videos regarding outdoor mosaics. So these questions can range from substrates and adhesives, sealing, mesh, and grouting. So I thought it would be a good idea if we just addressed all of these questions since we're entering the spring season on the calendar here in the United States. In fact, today is the first day of spring. What perfect timing! So you may be in the planning stages of your outdoor mosaics, and so some of these things, if not many of these things, are already top of mind in your planning process. So as we go through this list of questions, take some of these things into consideration, especially if they pertain to your particular mosaic. I've also put together a playlist regarding mosaics for outdoors, and I also did a previous Q&A video where we touched on a lot of these same topics for outdoor mosaics. And so it was a really good information-packed video, and I'll include links to both of those down below in the description in case you're interested. I also want to point out that anything you hear me discuss or maybe I use in this video, I will include a list to those items down below in the description in case you're starting to plan your outdoor mosaics. You can access this information if you're on your desktop computer by clicking more under the video description. And if you're watching on your tablet or your smartphone, you can click more under the video title. So in today's video, we're going to set the record straight and clear up some of your questions regarding outdoor mosaics. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. We're going to jump right into our first topic, and this one is a substrate that I'm asked about a lot, especially when it comes to outdoor mosaics. We've talked about it a number of times here on the channel, but it's always worth revisiting, especially if somebody asked a question about it, because it can be detrimental to your mosaic for outdoors. Let's start with this question from Sherry, who asks, can you use wood in an outdoor application? What's the answer, class? That's right. No, 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 no. Absolutely not. And here's why. Wood naturally expands and contracts when outdoors. Heck, I'm even skittish about putting a mosaic that's on a wood substrate in the bathroom. Why risk it? In my 25 plus years of mosaic making, I've made a handful of mosaic birdhouses on wood substrates. But I let the customer know up front, these birdhouses are decor items only. They're not suitable for outdoors. So if you make a mosaic on wood and you put it outdoors, you know what's going to happen? Over time, might be a short period of time, the wood is going to expand and contract, and your grout's going to start to crack. And then your tesserae are going to fall off. It's not a good look. So instead, you want to use a substrate that's suitable for outdoor mosaics. Things like stone, cement, ceramic, glass, porcelain, terracotta, even acrylic. Set yourself up for success and avoid using wood for your outdoor mosaics. Okay, moving on to our next topic. You guys have asked a lot of questions about mesh for mosaics, so let's jump right in. I did a whole dedicated video to mesh for mosaic here on my channel, so I'm not going to get too into it here. I'll include a link down below in the description in case you're interested in exploring it more. So we have a bunch of questions in this section, and I'm going to try to quickly go through them. The first is from Maria, who asked a question referencing my mosaic mesh video. And she writes, when using the adhesive mesh, you mentioned it loses its stickiness eventually. Does that mean once you made your mosaic, the pieces will gradually start to fall off the completed project? Or were you just saying that once you pull it out to use it for a project, it won't be sticky anymore and you'll have to use your own adhesive anyway? Thanks. Self-adhesive mesh will lose its stickiness eventually. Eventually. Just like masking tape loses its stickiness over time. But also, if you put a tesserae on and you take it off, and then you put a tesserae on and you take it off, and you put a tesserae on, and so on, it's going to start to lose its stickiness as well. If you're going to mosaic on mesh right now, and then adhere your mosaic to its final substrate tomorrow or soonish, and your tesserae aren't itty-bitty little things, but they're big enough to attach themselves to the mesh at multiple points on each tessera, then you can use self-adhesive mesh. If your tesserae aren't too big and heavy, meaning they couldn't easily fall off if you were to pick the mesh up off your work table, and you'll be adhering your mesh mosaic to the final substrate tomorrow or soonish, then you can use self-adhesive mesh. The problem comes in when you mosaic on self-adhesive mesh, but you don't use that mosaic for a while. Or let's say you start the mosaic on mesh, but you don't finish it right now. The stickiness of the self-adhesive mesh will be a pain when you go to store that incomplete or unfinished mosaic. Trust me, been there, bought the t-shirt. If you've got an unfinished mosaic that's on self-adhesive mesh, that adhesive is going to attract dust, particles, maybe shards. It's going to attract things. And over time, more and more is going to collect. So when you come back to that mosaic, you're going to try to clean it off if you can, but also all of those things on the adhesive are going to cover up the adhesive. You're no longer going to have self-adhesive mesh, you're just going to have mosaic mesh. So therefore, you're going to need to use your own adhesive in order to get your tesserae down on the mesh and staying in place. And here's another little tip or food for thought. If you're going to use self-adhesive mesh for an ungrouted mosaic, and you think by putting it on an adhesive mesh that your mosaic is going to stay in place until who knows when, I wouldn't take that risk. I would not take that risk. One of the benefits of grouting your mosaic is that it keeps things in place, you know, kind of like Spanx in a way. It just sucks everything in, sort of. It keeps everything together. It gives it a foundation. If you have an ungrouted mosaic, you don't have that grout foundation, whether you use grout or thin set. Therefore, it's risky to think that if you use self-adhesive mesh and no grout, that your pieces are going to stay on forever. Don't make that mistake, okay? If you're going to use self-adhesive mesh for an ungrouted mosaic, because that's what you have, fantastic. Use an adhesive with your tesserae. That's all I'm saying. Use an adhesive. Even though it is self-adhesive mesh, you are buying an insurance policy by bringing in your own adhesive to your mosaic. Our next question comes from Groovy, who asks, I want to make a design on mesh to attach to a stepping stone. Could I use the acrylic adhesive if it is going to be outside? I'll make it short, sweet, and to the point. You can use whatever adhesive you want with the mosaic mesh. Personally, in this type of situation, I would just use Weld Bond to anchor the tesserae onto the mesh. Yes, Weld Bond is water soluble. Yes, this will be on a stepping stone that's going to be outside in the rain, but it doesn't matter, and here's why. Think of mesh as a substrate or an intermediate substrate. You're adhering your tesserae to anchor them to the mesh. The mesh is sort of like a placeholder, if you will. So you're just, I don't even want to say you're temporarily attaching your tesserae to the mesh, because that's not what you're doing. It's like a temporary substrate. Does that make sense? So the adhesive that you use on your mesh will have no impact on the final mosaic on the stepping stone. The mesh is going to make your life easier regarding the tiling and the installation of the mosaic on the final substrate, but there are some other benefits to using mesh in your mosaic work. Our next commenter asked, I've heard that you have to use a special mesh called AR as it is especially made for concrete products. Is the fiberglass the same? As they said that concrete can eat other meshes. Yes, it's true. You do want your mesh to be alkali resistant, or AR, if you're going to be using a cement-based adhesive with your mosaic. Why? Because a cement environment is a very alkaline environment. Okay, so not to get too sciencey here, but I know my scientist dad is probably grinning looking down at me right now, but fiberglass AR mesh is covered in zirconium oxide, which makes the mesh resistant to cement-based products. And so that allows it to stay strong and intact. So one big benefit of using mesh on stepping stones is that should your stepping stone crack, the mesh you mosaicked on would hopefully hold the mosaic together. Heck, it might even help to hold the stepping stone together despite the crack. And because you used AR mesh with your mosaic on your stepping stone, hopefully if there is a crack, the only thing that needs to be repaired is the actual stepping stone substrate and not your mosaic. The next question comes from Kat, who writes, I've never created an outdoor mosaic and always wondered about materials. This was super helpful. Can I ask, is the mesh something you'd only use on the sides, or can it be used on the top flat surface? Thanks. You can use mesh however you want, whether it's on a vertical surface or a flat horizontal surface. In my stepping stone video, I tiled the sides of the stepping stone, which is not really traditional because usually you bury your stepping stones in the ground and you step on them, right? So I got a lot of flack about tiling the sides of my stepping stone. People were very opinionated and concerned. What are you doing, Julie? But where I was planning to place the stepping stone was in a bunch of mulch in the garden, and it wouldn't have been stepped on. Plus, there's a little bit of a, I don't want to say a flooding problem in that little garden area, but I did want the stepping stone to be a bit raised up from the mulch so that it didn't get drowned or lost. So at this point, because I wasn't burying it in the ground, it did become a bit more like a piece of art. And so it sat half submerged in the mulch. So the sides of the stepping stone were seen, and I wanted them to look pretty. I didn't want them to just be plain old cement. I encourage you to watch the mesh video because I do go into detail as to what types of products would work well for the self-adhesive mesh versus the non-adhesive mesh. Our next question comes from Courtney, who writes, "Thank you so much for this video. I have a question. I am about to begin a project where the mosaics will go on stepping stones in a garden. How would you attach the mesh to the stones? I think the mesh would be easier for a group to work on for this project, but I'm concerned for wear and tear. I am in Houston and our summers are brutal." We've touched on it a bit here in the video, but I'm going to be very, very clear. You want to use a fortified thin set, or depending on where you live, a fortified cement-based adhesive to attach your mesh mosaic to the final stepping stone substrate. Once you're done with that and you've grouted it, I also suggest sealing your mosaic. Our last question in this section asks, Can you use window screen as a substitute for mesh? This question doesn't exactly have a definitive yes or no. For me personally, it's a firm no, but I'm going to tell you why and how I got to that answer, and you can make the decision for yourself. Having said that, at the core of Mosaic is experimentation and pushing the limits artistically to see what can be done. So if you didn't know what mosaic mesh was before you started watching this video, you probably have a vague idea now. So one of the disadvantages of using window screen as your mesh is that the holes or the openings of the window screen are super small. Why does this matter? In contrast, the openings on mosaic mesh are much bigger, and that's by design. They allow just enough material, so just enough space between the openings for your tesserae to be anchored, but not so much material that the adhesive on your final substrate can't come through or ooze up and grab a hold of your tesserae. This would be much more difficult for the adhesive to do if you were using window screen with those much smaller openings. But another concern with using window screen is how is your adhesive going to react to it? So you've got metal window screen and you've got vinyl window screen. So if you use metal window screen on your mosaic, let's say you were to use white grout or white thin set, your screening, your metal screening over time is going to start to rust, right? It's out in the elements. It's going to start to rust. Eventually, there's going to be some moisture in there. There's going to be some rusting most likely, and it's going to start to show. It's going to start to come out, and you will see it on the white thin set or grout. Maybe that's not a big deal to you because it's already out in the elements anyways. You see a little bit of Mother Nature's wear and tear on it. No big deal. I think if you're going to put the work into doing that mosaic, all of that work, you probably don't want to use the metal window screen. Then we move over to the vinyl window screen. The vinyl window screen may not work well with your adhesive. You're going to have to do a little trial and error with that. But also, it may disintegrate or not hold up once it's in contact with the cement-based adhesives. And just as we talked about a little earlier regarding the fiberglass mesh, the AR mesh, holding up when in contact with cement-based adhesives or grout, you do have the possibility that your stepping stone could stay together with the AR mesh. That may not be the case with the vinyl window screening. That stuff may deteriorate. It may not hold up should there be a crack in your stepping stone, and then all of a sudden you not only have a crack in your stepping stone, but now your mosaic has a crack. Something a little more detrimental has happened to your stepping stone by using the vinyl screening as opposed to just using the fiberglass mosaic mesh. If you want to experiment, then go for it. That's what mosaic is all about. My suggestion would be to make some samples first. See how you like it. See how it works. You may mosaic on that and then go to pick it up and everything sort of collapses on itself because the adhesive didn't work or whatever. So you just want to experiment a little bit before you get to the big show, your big final mosaic. So in this next section, we're going to address some questions that have to do with grout and thin set. So in the US, thin set is thin set mortar. It's a cement-based adhesive. If you live outside of the US, your thin set is going to be whatever cement-based adhesive is available in your country. The first question comes from Stephanie, who asks, if I grouted a piece and then it dries and I noticed I missed a few spots, can I just add more grout to the areas I missed? The answer is yes. You can certainly go back and fill in more grout. I've certainly done this, but you want to make sure that you take care of this in a timely manner. So not 5 years down the road, not even 1 year down the road. You want to get on this and get it done. And if this is an outdoor mosaic, you want to make sure that you address that issue before you put that mosaic outside. Our next question is from Patricia, who writes, I went several months where I just lost my desire to mosaic. Sadly, now I have thin set and grout that may be getting old. What do I do with it? Can I mold it in resin molds? By the way, love the Q&A. First off, Patricia isn't alone, and I certainly have had some seasons where I haven't had the desire to mosaic, and I think that that's totally normal. You know, we aren't machines, we aren't robots, and we have a lot of pressures, moods, demands on us that, you know, sometimes are out of our control. I think the important thing is that we give ourselves some grace and that we are patient with ourselves and not guilt ourselves, but just know that your work, your creative space will be there when you're ready to come back to it, and you will come back at the perfect time for you. And I know that sometimes, as much as we would love to get lost in our creative spaces and in our mosaic projects, sometimes we equally have no desire to cut tesserae and place it on a substrate. And I think that that's just totally normal. Totally normal. Now, as far as the old grout and thin set, you know, that may be something that you don't think about or even know about. But yeah, this stuff does have a shelf life, unfortunately. So you want to look for a date on the container or bag of your grout or thin set to see what the manufacturer recommends as far as how long this stuff is good for. I keep all of my grouts and thin sets in airtight containers, which allow me to keep them for much longer. And I keep most of them in my hot and humid garage in Miami. So you know those containers are good. Airtight containers are the way to go, and I love mine. So a fun thing you can do with your old grout and thin set before they go bad is to create your own substrates. Although you may not feel comfortable using these out-of-date grouts and thin sets in your mosaic art, they will be fine in your substrates. So I've done a number of videos here on the channel about making your own substrates, and I'll include a link to the playlist down below in the description. Now, you may be asking, I don't see a date on my packaging, or I don't even have the original packaging anymore. How can I tell if these things are aging out? Couple tests for you. You want to look at the powder, okay? If the powder is not a nice, fine, grainy powder, but instead it's in a block, or you have like bigger pieces or bigger clumps within your container, it's on its way out. That means that some moisture has hit it and things are starting to clump together. So it would be perfect to use as your substrates, you know, to mix up and make in your substrates, but you're going to want to get a fresh bag of grout or thin set whenever you're ready and you need it. Our next commenter asked, my flower pots will be outside in Arizona with temps up to 120 degrees. Temps can also freeze in the winter, 28 degrees. Both temperatures are Fahrenheit. Do I need special adhesives or grouts for these temps if pots are outside year-round? Thank you. First off, I would suggest watching the flower pot video here on my channel. It'll be included in the Outdoor Mosaics playlist, linked down below in the description. So that video is going to set you up on a good path as far as prepping your substrate as well as choosing your tesserae for various weather conditions. You don't need special adhesives or grout for outdoor mosaics other than you need to use a fortified cement-based adhesive. In the States it's called thin set. You can even grout with thin set, and then I would follow it up by sealing your mosaic. And speaking of sealing your mosaics, these next couple questions have to do with grout sealer. And yes, I've done a video all about how to seal your mosaics, and that will be included in the playlist for outdoor mosaics, which is linked down below. Our first question comes from Andrea, who writes, if you're using waterproof or outside grout, why would you seal it? Great videos, by the way. So if I'm making a mosaic for outdoors, I'm going to seal my grout. Period. Full stop. There are so many benefits to sealing your mosaics from things that happen outside. This goes beyond mold, mildew, and extreme temperatures. I'm talking about, you know, grass stains, mud, bird and insect poop. You know, it's gross, but yeah, blank happens, okay? And so I want to do every single thing that I can do to safeguard the longevity and life and look of my outdoor mosaics. So I'm going to use a fortified cement-based adhesive for my adhesive. I may even grout with that fortified cement-based adhesive. I'm certainly going to seal my mosaic grout, whether that's grout or thin set. I'm going to seal it as well. I'm going to do every single thing that I can do to just prolong things happening, you know, that happen out there in the world, or in the garden, rather. Our next question comes from Kim, who asks, "This was great, Julie, thank you. To add to the sealing question, do you apply a sealer on a yearly basis, or is once enough for an outside garden piece?" If needed, sure, grout can be resealed, just be careful. A very important thing to keep in mind should you need or want to reseal your grout is that you need to make sure the grout is super clean before you reseal it. If your grout is dirty and you seal it, you're sealing in what's on the surface. So I'm talking about things like dirt, mold, mildew, stains, whatever. So you definitely want to make sure your grout is cleaned thoroughly first. And by doing this, you're most likely rubbing off any sealer that's on there from the first round of sealing. So in your second round, you want to be just as thorough with applying the sealer everywhere. And so once you feel like your grout is thoroughly clean, there's no way you can get it any cleaner, wait 48 hours and then apply your grout sealer just as you did the first time around. So I can't move or else you see that. I've got a little bit of the RSV still going on. Y'all, it's been 6 weeks that I've had RSV. 6 weeks! I've been cleaning out the studio a little bit, and so it appears I have caused some glaring with the lights. So I'm gonna stay just like this. Static cling, there you go. I don't know if they're static cling. Let's start over. Oh man, I was doing so good there. All these sciencey terms. My brain is not a science and math brain. Okay, gotta get this down for Dad. So zirconium oxide, baby, okay? I am so excited for spring. I don't know if you guys are, but ooh, I love to see the flowers and but if you're working on a mosaic for the spring, you know, an outdoor mosaic, I would love to see it. Please, 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 if you think about it, tag me so I can see it. I would love to see what you guys are working on, and that is probably the best way for me to see what you're doing. And I will post my Instagram handle here, but yeah, I just can't wait to hear what you guys are working on. And yeah, and it doesn't even have to be a spring mosaic. It could be, you know, whatever you're doing for outdoors. Let's just say spring, summer, whatever. I would love to see it. I would love to see it. Doesn't have to be a flower pot. It could be, you know, whatever, something for the garden, a totem pole or something. But anyways, I would love to see it. I hope you're doing well. I love you. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. For more mosaic inspiration, check out one of these 2 videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.